Hey everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Coder. In this next episode, we are going to continue on with our Conway's Game of Life. And I should probably say that we have finished Conway's Game of Life. So this is more so like an extras tutorial. And it's not about Conway's Game of Life. What it really is about is how to save and open files using WebGL. Right, so that's really what we're after. That's the only functionality right now that is broken in our WebGL build of Conway's Game of Life, is the ability to save and load files. So, like we discussed it before, we can't do this locally because we don't have permission on the client's machine to access the file system. So we need to figure out how to do it remotely. Okay, so one of these things that we need is software called PHP, and that's basically a server-side programming software that allows us to create applications on the server that clients can communicate with. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to head over to the PHP site and download PHP. Okay. So once you've downloaded and installed PHP, whether it's on Mac, Linux, or Windows, doesn't matter. Just make sure that it's installed. And once that's done, you can open up a terminal window, and that can either be terminal for Mac, or it can be a command window inside of Windows, or also terminal for Linux. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to navigate to your folder, Conway's Game of Life. And in our case, we really just need to do cd space, which means change directory, and that's on a Mac. And we'll just kind of drag and drop this folder into terminal. And then from there, it's just a matter of pressing enter. And now if we look, I'm going to expand this window out a little bit. We are in our folder here. If we do ls-l, that'll be list details. We can see all of our folders and files in our Conway's Game of Life. And if you've been following along, this is basically what your folder structure should look like. Now, if you go to your HTML folder, you'll see that it's got the build folder, the template data folder, and the index.html file. So what we're going to want to do is, in this folder specifically, we are going to want to start our own PHP server that is going to be responsible for hosting our PHP files that Unity is going to then communicate with. Okay, so the way to do that is to just write php-s in a capital S, and then you use your host, and I'm going to use 9090. Okay, that's going to be the port that we're going to run on. So php-s localhost 9090. So now it tells us that, okay, PHP development server started at basically the date and time, and it's telling us that it's listening on HTTP localhost 9090. So now if we were to open a website or a browser and go to localhost 9090, we'll see that our Unity game is starting up. And if you look at your server, okay, which is here, you can see that it has tried to access all of these files when we went to that site. Okay. So this is working as expected. So now we've got a PHP server running in that location, which is pretty cool. And let's see what we can do here is we're going to leave this running, okay? And then in a separate window, a separate terminal window. So what we'll do is on Mac, I can just do terminal, or sorry, shell, new tab, and I like novel, which is nice. We can then again drag in, actually I'm going to just drag in HTML to make this even lazier. Whoops, we're going to go cd space and then HTML. Drag that in, and now we're in the HTML folder. So now all we have to do is we need to create a file. Okay, so we'll need to create 3 files, and the way that you do that in Linux and Mac is you could use a touch command, and you could just do, alright, so we're going to call one getFiles.php, then we're going to call one loadFile.php, and one savefile.php. So if we do a listing now, we can see that we've got those three files: get files, load file, and save file. So if we want to edit those, I have Sublime text editor installed. We could also utilize Visual Studio, and you know what? So we're going to go back to our folder, and in our folder, inside of the HTML folder, we should now see get files, load file, and save file. So I'm going to right click on get file and click on open with, and then open with Visual Studio. And I'm also going to do that with load file and with save file. So now in Visual Studio we have get files, load file, and save file. And each of these files is going to need something special. In order for a file to know that it's PHP, or a server to know that a file is a PHP file, it has to have this less than question mark PHP and less or question mark greater than in the file. Okay, so this is the beginning of PHP processing. This is the end of PHP processing. So we're going to do that to all the files. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it into the others, saving along the way. All right. So for get files, what we need to do, let's see here. We need to specify what our patterns folder is. So we're going to go ahead and do patterns folder equals patterns. And then we're going to do files equals scander patterns folder. So basically what that means is PHP has a method that we can utilize called scander. And scander basically takes and kind of grabs everything that's inside of a folder, and then we store that inside of our files variable. And by the way, PHP variables start with a $sign. So from here we can go to create another variable, and the output is going to be XML version equals 1.0. Yeah, so part of the output is going to be XML version 1.0, and then output, output dot equals files, and I'll get into why we're doing it this way in a second. And then we have to make sure that we're going to do a for loop here. For I equals 2, I is greater than or less than count files I plus plus. And then from here we're going to output dot equals file. And what we're doing here is we're constructing an XML document. More on that in a minute. Output dot equals file name, files I, and then we close the file name. Output dot equals file. And finally, after the for loop is finished, we're going to do an output dot equals files. And then finally, we're going to echo the output. Oops, that's wrong. Output. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Just to kind of go over this really quick, and just to kind of briefly explain the PHP syntax. A lot of this should look familiar because it's very similar to C#, but there's also a lot of differences. For one, every variable has a $sign in front of it. You do not need to instantiate variables. They basically just are there. Once you put a $sign in front of anything, it becomes a variable. And the variable types are not strongly defined here, as you can tell. You can put whatever you want into a variable right here. We're just putting strings. But you could just as easily have done an integer or a float or anything else, and it wouldn't have mattered. You don't have to basically tell it what kind of variable you're going to store. You can, but you don't have to. So what we have here is we are going to, this particular PHP file, it's going to give us data. And the data that it's going to give us is about the files that are in the patterns folder on the server. Now we don't have a patterns folder yet, and there aren't any files in it because it doesn't exist. So, but in either case, what happens is we are basically creating an XML document here, okay, and that starts by telling it what version of XML we're using, and then we're starting with this top node here, which is called files. So this kind of encompasses, think of this as like a, if you've ever done any web development, this would be like a div, right? A starting div and a closing div. So it's just a tag. And the parent tag is called files, right? And then inside of there we have individual files, right? And those are tagged with file and a closing file. And then inside of every file we have properties, right? So we have child nodes of file, which would be, one would be file name. And that, what we're doing is we're getting our current iteration of our files array, which is right here. So this basically, the scanner outputs an array of everything that's in this folder and stores it in files, which by the way is an array, which you can't tell because, like I said, they're not strongly typed variables. They are basically just there. they just exist. They don't need to be told what they are. Okay. So this is an array, and then we iterate over this array. We started two because the first two pieces of I guess files that scanner finds is a dot and a dot dot. Okay, those are also part of a directory. Those are actual files. But they're not files that you can edit or do anything with. They are there though in the directory, so we need to omit them because those are not files that we're going to want to open. So we basically just say we start at 2 because 0 and 1 are those two. The 0 is a dot, and then 2 or 1 is 2 dots. So we start at 2, and then we count. Count is used to pretty much tell us how many items are in the array. So then we take the current index that we're at, and then we grab whatever file name is there at that file location, and we set that as the value for the file name property in the file node of the file's master. So once we get done, we iterate over all of them. We finish files by putting a /files, and then we echo the output, which basically is the formatted XML document. So that's what Unity is going to read back once we actually implement that. I think what we'll do is we might go ahead and create the rest of these. Let's see what we're doing here on time. Yeah, we're good. So we can either go ahead and start working with XML HTTP requests to see how that's going to work, or we can go ahead and create the save file and load file. And I think we should just go ahead and create the save file and load file. Those should be pretty simple to create. So let's do that. So since we've already got this up, got load file here. So load file is very, very easy. We are going to, from our Unity project, we're going to send a path to this PHP file. And that path we can grab as a post variable, and we'll call it path, Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll create a variable called pattern, and we're just going to use file get contents, and we're going to pass in path. So file get contents is another PHP method that basically gets the contents of a file at a given path. Okay. So then all we have to do from here is we have to just echo, echo pattern. So then our response to our XML HTTP request will be whatever echo displays from pattern. And echo basically is, think of that as like a print function almost. It takes whatever is in the variable and prints it out to the screen. However, there is a limitation with that. It cannot print out objects. So like if you have an array, it won't print the contents of an array. It'll literally just print the word array. So keep that in mind. If you want more functionality like that, you can use something like print r, or var dump will also do it. Will print out the entirety of an array or any object that you put in it. So that's kind of useful. We can save this now, because that's all that we need to put into the load file.php. And for save file, well, for save file we're going to need two things. We are going to need the path where we're going to save the file, and that's going to be passed in as path again. And we're going to need the object. The object being the basically what we're serializing. It's going to be passed in as object. So then we can do this. If bytes equals file put contents path object, then we can say echo saved dot bytes dot exclamation, and then we say else echo save failed. Okay, a couple of things going on here. First of all, we are doing an if statement that says, hey, if file put contents equals true, that means that it was able to execute whatever this method is doing, then we're good. We saved whatever bytes we saved. And bytes is actually a variable that we assign the output of file put contents to. So file put contents, think of every time that we create a function and we add the word void in front of that function, that means that function doesn't return anything. But if we were to instead add the word string instead of void, so we would say string whatever name of the method is, then our calling, whatever calls that method, is going to expect there to be some sort of return, right? It could be string. In this case, file put contents will either return the number of bytes that were put wherever we decided to put them, or it will return false. So we can literally say if bytes equals file put contents, meaning that if it actually is, right? If it is, if it's not false, right? If this line of code, forget about this for a second, right? Forget about this, and just think of that first, that part right there. Just file put contents path object. What we know about testing inside of if statements is that whenever we test a Boolean against anything, if we just write the variable name, so if variable name, right, without saying equals equals false or equals equals true, then it'll basically check to see if it is true. And if it is true, that's the first thing that gets returned. If it's false, then it would be in the else statement, unless you put a not, which is an exclamation mark, ahead of that. So and then all of this is doing is it's assigning whatever the output is to this, okay? So whatever the output of file put contents is, it's assigning to this. This check still happens. This doesn't mean anything. We're not asking if bytes equals file put contents. That's not saying that. This is an assignment operator. If we were to write this, that wouldn't work, because that would check to see if bytes were equal to file put contents, which it would never be, because bytes prior to us assigning file put contents to it would have equaled nothing. So we need to, here we assign the output of this to that. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So the other one that I wanted to talk to you about in PHP is this dot here. That might look weird, but since you've seen it a couple times now, you could probably have guessed what it is. It is a concatenating operator. Basically the same thing as going with plus in C#. So instead of plus, we use dot, and that concatenates whatever we concatenate with. So I hope that makes sense. These are the 3 files that we need. Okay, we don't need to do anything else in PHP. Make sure that we keep our server running, which is right here. If for any reason your window closes between now and the next episode and you need to rerun your server again, I'll go ahead and go through that process again anyways with you in the next episode. But just in case, let's just say it stops running. You're at this screen. Make sure that you're in your HTML folder. Okay, so do a listing here. Make sure you've got your build, template data, get files, index, load file, save file. Make sure they're all in there. And then all you have to do is type php-s localhost :9090, or whatever port you want to listen to. I would suggest to stick with 9090 because you know, if you want to follow along, it'll just make things easier. If not, make sure you choose a higher port range than that. A lot of the lower ports are actually already spoken for, and you don't want to have any conflicts. So it would be like a port in, like, you know, 69,000 range, somewhere in there. Sorry, invalid address. I think the maximum number of ports is 64 or 65,000 something. Yeah. So you can go up to 65,000, which is fine. But, you know, like I said, just stick to 9090, and that'll do just fine for our purposes. This is not even something that you have to worry about if you decide to upload your game to a web server, because hopefully at that point your game will just run on port 80 or port 443 for running HTTPS. So with that, we are going to end the tutorial here, and in the next tutorial we're going to start to kind of put things together. You know, we're going to make it so that those 3 files that we just created, you're going to see that they're actually going to work and do something for us, rather than just sitting on a server somewhere doing nothing. So hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Comments go down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to check out my Patreon. I welcome all patrons anytime. You guys feel free to donate however much money you want. I'll see you guys next time.